In the midst of the road, a tire blows out in a vehicle carrying 6 friends. One of the women had a head injury when the car shook violently at high speed. There are 3 males and 3 females in this circle of friends. Sarah is the woman atop the pink ensemble. Karen is the one wearing the green jacket, and Jody is the one who struck her on the head. Just 4 of them. Jeff, a man in a blue shirt, is its sole member. Some man wearing a drab shirt. Todd was along with his white-shirted companion. Okay, Eric. Everyone is eager to attend Jody's sister's birthday party, which is set to take place in a tiny town so isolated that the monthly traffic count is analytic. Everything seemed to be going swimmingly at first. Todd intends to use his spare tire to change the flat tire on his vehicle. Plus, there are 3 of them, which isn't exactly rocket science. Sarah is unfazed and determined to take selfies for her social media status updates, regardless of the circumstances. But getting the right signal is really tough due to how far away the place is. Karen, inquisitively, walked backwards for 3 meters, and her signal was just picked up. After that. Shortly after, the weather turned unbearably hot, so Jody and Karen sought refuge behind the vehicle. However, Eric felt the need to relieve himself and made a beeline for the nearby bushes. Todd was Jeff changed the tires on his own since the car's owner was preoccupied with Sarah. In no time at all, Jeff had changed the tires on the vehicle. Picking up the tire was made more difficult by the slight downhill position, which caused his car tires to roll. On the flip side, Jeff glanced over and saw a bullet smack dab in the center of the road. His companions were engrossed in conversation, and he felt a sense of relief to join in. As soon as Todd saw his car's tires rolling, he began to pursue them down the street. Sarah had planned to check on the new tires that Jeff had installed, but she was taken aback when she learned of Jeff's terrible death. The shock she felt caused her to keep her mouth shut. It had not yet occurred to Todd, who had taken the tire, that anything was amiss. Regrettably, Sarah was unexpectedly hit by a gunshot in that brief period. Even at that very moment, Karen and Jody have no idea that someone is chasing after them. A bullet had already pierced Sarah's eyeball, and another shot had just hit her. From that vantage point, Karen observed her surroundings, and she was unsure of the origin of the gunshots. Without wasting a second, she yelled out for her companions to duck behind the vehicle. Todd, who had not yet woken up, was hit in the left shoulder while unconscious. Eric, meanwhile, had to duck behind a tree truck for cover since he couldn't get to the car in time. They had nowhere else to go but behind the car for protection from the relentless gunfire. It was no one's fault that the tire blowout became a catastrophe. Evidently, the shooter had set a trap to cause the blown tire. They started to get confused in their captivity an hour later. Being the son of military parents, Karen naturally thought the gunman had utilized a silencer to muffle his shots. Furthermore, the fact that the bullet was unable to penetrate the car suggested that the person's location was rather distant. Due to the gunshot wound to his left shoulder, Todd was weak and hardly able to move. Worse yet, Eric had nowhere else to go but hide behind a tree trunk and cross his fingers. The tires that Jeff changed out were actually already on the vehicle, they just needed to remove the bolts. However, it's impossible to accomplish. In order to survive, they needed to devise a new strategy. Karen promptly followed up by saying that she could still receive a signal on her cell phone from 3 meters away in the other direction. After Todd reached out to shake hands, Jody swiftly produced a stick from her pocket. Karen had previously programmed the Google Assistant to dial 911 at the first sign of trouble. Without missing a beat, Todd pointed the phone and received a signal. Regrettably, that distant psychopath shot Karen's cell phone the second she yelled out to dial 911. As for the second option, Todd intends to shift into neutral and then push the car back to a spot that receives a signal. They arranged themselves in a formation, with Jody stationed at the front to record the gunfire's origin. Todd attempted to open the car door and put the gearshift into neutral as Karen sat in the back with a stuffed scarecrow. Suddenly, the scarecrows were shot. Subsequently, Todd attempted to attach the keys to the car while getting inside, but he had to duck for cover because he couldn't spare a second to shift into neutral. Fortunately, the gunman was found hiding in a tree, and Jody succeeded in locating the shot's origin. The presence of a sniper in that tree was plainly apparent. Equally muddled is the person's intended meaning. He has been in the tree for quite some time, though, that much is obvious. Then Todd, who is still stuck on getting the gears to neutral, looked for safety gear. Fortunately, he could see his toolbox in the trunk of the vehicle, and he was resolute in his decision to retrieve it. Todd, who had gotten his hands on the toolbox, wasted no time fashioning the iron cover into a protective glove. However, Eric was only able to surrender and had no idea what his friends had in store for him after that. Todd, who had shielded his hand, swiftly ordered Jody and Karen to take positions. Almost instantly, Todd hopped in the car and managed to shift into neutral. Sadly, he had to take a gunshot wound to the hand. After that, the vehicle sped downhill without delay. Even though they are helpless, Karen and Jody do their best to steady the vehicle. Maintaining control of the vehicle was a real challenge. The release of Jody's grip caused her to bounce until she stepped out of the car. Ultimately, the car came to a halt when the unbolted tires were shot directly. The gunman was reloading his weapon simultaneously, which Karen saw as a perfect opportunity for Jody to flee. Just as Eric attempted to flee, Jody shot him down. So, in the end, given the state of his legs, which had been shot on both sides, Eric was unable to go anywhere else. It would have been appropriate to shoot Eric dead. On the other hand, the gunman knowingly allowed Eric to endure his pain until he passed out an hour later. Despite the fact that everyone is extremely parched, Todd saw a bottle of water stashed in the car seat. In times of crisis, they do their best to communicate openly. Shot in the hand, Eric's pain intensified as he prepared to drink some water. Actually, that long-distance psychopath is just like any other human being. She gets hungry or thirsty and has nowhere else to go. Jody, who was frantic to be, could do nothing else but be by Karen's side. Then Todd couldn't accept it after seeing the crow devour his girlfriend's body. Sarah had passed away while he was on his way to visit her. Interestingly, though, Todd was unshot by the enigmatic gunman. So much so that Todd even managed to plant a kiss on his girlfriend's lips and take her hand. Meanwhile, Wolf was closing in on Eric, who was already near death. In this case, Eric gives up in an instant because the wolf will eat him alive. As Todd confronted the gunman, he glanced over and saw a car driving by. This is, of course, extremely unlikely to happen given the odds. The wolf stopped eating because Todd was shot at that moment. Okay, Eric. There was no way out of that situation for Todd. He had to die in front of his girlfriend's lifeless body. Karen and Jody waved to the driver of the car. But the woman's ring finger was the target of a bullet wound to her hand. So, there was a lot of blood all over the floor. The situation deteriorated further when the driver lost control of the wheel. After that, it slammed into Todd's vehicle. That was standing before him, and it was the thing that knocked Jeff's head off his body. So, in an instant, Karen and Jody's sole possibility of salvation disappeared. The woman behind the wheel began to reawaken. Nevertheless, the gunman opened fire on her multiple times shortly thereafter. Also shown here is the man who fights for the life of his daughter, the heir to the throne. At this very moment, Karen and Jody are screaming at him to remain hidden behind the car. Karen advised the dad to dial 911 immediately. It would appear that the father's location was already within the range of the signal. Unaware of the father's whereabouts, the gunman began firing at a car's fuel tank until nightfall. Ultimately, the father was no longer protected as the car exploded. The evidence is plain to see. Gradually, the father's body burned to ash. The girl, on the other hand, was still wide awake and covered in wounds as she lay across the street. The long-distance psychopath shot his daughter until her skull burst the second she woke up. Karen and Jody had to witness worsening death after death from these brief moments onward. Not to mention, they have no idea how to stay away from that distant psychopath. Despite the fact that the aid vehicle is unable to traverse this road, Karen eventually devises a strategy, and they are compelled to take action. Karen warned that finding the shooter's location would be more challenging once night fell due to smoke. The unknown assailant didn't miss a second as he kept watching the scene. Then there was Karen, who had a cutter on hand and intended to rip apart a few car seats. Meanwhile, Jody plundered the back trunk for a bottle of gas, a bag of clothing, and a beverage container, which she then took. Lucky for them, there were 2 more drinks left in the box, which they promptly consumed. Jody wasted no time retrieving one shirt from the bag after another to use as a makeshift mask in case of an emergency. Just as Karen was about to light the newspaper on fire with a lighter, Jody poured a bottle of gasoline into the car seat. Eventually, smoke and flames began to billow from the vehicle. Nevertheless, the smoke was insufficient to provide them with an opportunity to evade its visibility. The long-distance psychopath's irritation grew as his visibility grew increasingly obscured. However, out of nowhere, Karen noticed a police car driving up to where they were. What this means is that the father's 911 call was connected and traced. Actually, the cops had 2 snipers on standby to monitor the whereabouts of the gunman. The situation at this location was immediately apparent to the newly arrived police. So he went to the state police for more help. However, at that very moment, that enigmatic individual shot Jarvis in the mouth. Sadly, the officer was once again lying in the driver's seat when he unintentionally stepped on the gas pedal. Karen urged Jody to run right away, but Jody was still too scared to go. Whether she liked it or not, Karen had to flee alone, and the smoke was beginning to clear. She was shot and killed instantly at that very moment. There were now just 2 officers instead of the 4 who had previously served. Jody was dead set on making a break for the police car, which was nearby. The unknown assailant was obviously better than the cops during a gunfight. The next thing Jody knew, he had to get in the police car. The shooter had used a single tree for cover, and she intended to smash into it. Incredibly, Jody accomplished this and brought the shooter tumbling down from the tree. Jody attempted to retrieve the rifle that had fallen the second he awoke. The assailant persisted in his efforts to free himself from the rope that bound him to the tree. Witness the silhouette of an enigmatic gunman up close and personal from this vantage point. Perched on the tree, this individual seemed to have run out of things to do as they patiently awaited their victim. Seriously, we don't even know his name halfway through the movie. In reality, Jody was frightened and hurried because of the seriousness of the situation. She opened fire on the man at that very second, killing him instantly. Dissatisfied even now. Shooting the enigmatic man in the head required Jody to fire 1 additional shot. Unfortunately, the gun's cock became stuck mid-reload. Jody proceeded to smear the man's face with the tip of the gun, whether you liked it or not. Jody noticed a few dings on the gun after that. The number of victims killed by gunfire on this road is marked by this line. He wanted to give the man 1 more tap on the head as a parting gift. The gun cocked, though, and Jody was shot in the neck. For some reason, this is quite bothersome. I have an idea, it would work better if the scene is cut when the gunman dies. Just make sure you know which road you'll be crossing if you're going somewhere. That concludes our synopsis of this film. Much thanks for your time. Reconvene with you in the subsequent video.